May I just take the liberty of defending Mr. Moeller for a second on the assertion you made that he's somehow contradicting himself by taking issue with the way Michael Rasmussen was dealt with, and at the same time admitting there are problems. Certainly, the system, the adjudication system set up for dealing with doping violations is fairly complex, but it's got a defined process. And guilty or not, a person who's accused is able to defend themselves within that system, and those rules should be applied. They should be applied across the board without prejudice. I can tell you that in my case, and again, this is going to sound somewhat contradictory to some of the other things I say. My point in coming forward and talking about what I know is to help the anti-doping agencies refine things. However, I have serious issues with the way that the CAS arbitration system works. If you're going to accuse someone of an anti-doping violation based on scientific evidence, which is not what Mr. Rasmussen went through, but is the way I went through it, you're entitled to very little discovery. For 2 entire years, when I disputed the testosterone case against me, I was told that because of the rules of discovery, I was not allowed to see the standard operating procedure for this test, but that it existed. And at the first hearing I had in the AAA, which is the American Arbitration Association, they brought 3 lab technicians who had worked on this test, and they testified about what this standard operating procedure said, but we were still told we were not allowed to have it. But it wasn't until another year later that at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, because of a mistake made by the lawyer for the lab, for USADA, who when asked a question about what the standard operating procedure said, when a question was asked of one of the lab technicians, he suggested that she be able to see the standard operating procedure. It was finally admitted that there never was a standard operating procedure. The lab, in fact, does not have one. So there are serious issues with the way these things are dealt with. That none of us here are saying that cycling doesn't have a doping problem, or that every now and then an innocent person might get convicted or a guilty person might go free. I think you're being overly judgmental about the position that Mr. Moeller is taking, because it's never going to be perfect. In my opinion, it would be because of the ambiguity of some of the tests, and notwithstanding the right motives, it would be better to let a few innocent people or a few guilty people go free than to convict innocent people in order to catch all of the guilty ones. And I also hope that, at least from my point of view, it doesn't come across that I'm completely pessimistic about cycling. I think cycling's a wonderful sport, and if it came across that way, I would hope that I've corrected that.
I'd just like to respond to your comment. Firstly, and I've got it written twice here in very clear language, and I'd like to show you. I've never said that the UCI didn't represent the interests of the sport. I've got it here written twice. The interests of the sport in popularising this, and I'll make this very clear so the record's very clear. It's the UCI has got the best interests of the sport, but is that commensurable with the best interests of the riders? And I think there's 2 very different things here. Popularising the sport is for commercial imperative of whatever your motivation is one thing. But is it in the best interest of the riders? And sometimes they're compatible, and very often they're not. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying the UCI doesn't represent the best interests of the sport, but the best interests of the sport and the best interests of the riders are not always, there's not always an overlap.
Yep. Thanks for clarifying that, and that's much more helpful interpretation. I understand what you mean now. I'd just like to say something in response to Floyd, and first of all, I do want to say that I respect his honesty in coming out now and in saying what he now is presenting to be the truth of his years in the sport, and the only thing I have to say to that is it's a couple of years too late, mate. It would have been better had you not put everybody through the courts and to millions of dollars in expenses and so on. But that doesn't mean that that I'm not glad that you're not now telling the truth, if it is the truth. And we can't comment on that because of legal cases that are ongoing at the moment, I guess. What I would just say is that the example that you gave about your defence in the AAA case, surely you were undermining that yourself, because at that time you were lying. You weren't telling the truth then, and the court recognised that on the balance of probabilities you were not telling the truth and that you were guilty, and they were right.
All right, so I'll deal with that. I'll put it this way. The accusation was that Floyd used testosterone. I don't think he's ever said that he lied about that. He lied about other things. He might have lied about doping, but he was defending himself against an accusation. The other thing is that Floyd's silence is and the time it took him to come out, I think we should not place all the burden on an individual and that they came out 2 years too late. If you've been involved, the structure of cycling is such that people are actively discouraged from talking about these things. And obviously it's been a long and painful process for Floyd to reach this point. And you've accused us of cheap shots. I thought that was a cheap shot. Okay, any more questions? One up the back.
My name's Jason Nichols. A couple of lovely comments. I mean, I'm sure everyone here has a great love of cycling as what it is, and I do my best, personally in my professional life to make sure that I educate the juniors that are actually coming up that, please do the right thing and the understanding of that. I think in the last couple of years, we've been seeing a change in the professional ideas that some teams have been putting on the emphasis of, please don't dope, don't ruin this sport, please, you will take down a team, we will lose sponsors. And in the end, that's a really critical part that actually has to come up, that we don't want the sport to die. And that's a very, very important thing. The other thing which I would like to add is that a professional body needs to be 100% correct. So all testing procedures, 100%. Every person at the top end, 100%. Make sure it's true from the top. Then people don't have any of these things of, oh yeah, but is that correct? You make sure that it's all 100% correct. The best thing, and the bit which, love him or hate him, he is who he is. And the one bit which we do find out when push comes to shove is, are the due processes that have been put in place, are they correct? Floyd found holes. They weren't little ones, big ones. And that's the sort of stuff which does need to be stopped, filled, and made sure that it's 100% correct. And I hope that somewhere along the way that people actually do find these little flaws and they're not covered up. I love the fact of open dialogue, and open dialogue is important, so I implore everybody. Thank you very much for turning up.
Yeah. Okay, Louis de Koken's got one more question, and I'm going to wind it up and say goodbye and thank you, and throw you at the ball.